Today we turn to Romans and chapter 1 and verse 21. In Romans 1, Paul is trying to establish the guilt of fallen man. See, there are two types of sinners in the world. One is the godless, immoral sinner who openly sins. And the other is the religious sinner who's got a lot of religion about him, whichever religion it may be, and goes through a lot of religious activities, but his heart and his inner life is just as corrupt and impure as anybody else's. But he pretends that he's holy. And in Romans chapter 1, Paul is dealing with the first type of sinner. And in Romans chapter 2, he's dealing with the second type of sinner. You know, Jesus once told a story in Luke chapter 15 about a man who had two sons, an elder son and a younger son. The younger son is a picture of the sinner described in Romans chapter 1, the godless, immoral person who goes out and does so many wrong things. And Romans chapter 2 is a picture of the elder son who lived at home, but whose heart was just as wicked. See his attitude to his younger brother when the younger brother came back, which indicates how wicked the older brother was. And at the end of the story, you find it's the older brother who's outside the house. So it's religious people who find salvation difficult to receive. Peter says in 1 Peter chapter 4, it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved. Even a righteous person righteous means humanly righteous. It's very difficult for him to be saved because he thinks he's so holy. He thinks he's so good. He thinks because he goes to meetings and reads the Bible and prays and sings, God accepts him. God doesn't. God's standard is 100% and nobody attains it. We have to come to God as sinners. And he's establishing the guilt of these two types of sinners in Romans chapter 1 and chapter 2. And if we keep that in mind as we go through, first of all, he deals with the person who is godless. Romans 1:21, he talks about those who knew God but did not honor him as God or give thanks. They became futile in their speculations and their foolish heart was darkened. Now, in Romans chapter 1, verse 21, all the way down to verse 32, it's like a slippery slide, a slide that goes all the way down to the bottom. And there are terrible sinners described in verse 30, slanderers, haters of God, insolent, arrogant, boastful, inventors of evil, and so on. People who are full of envy, verse 29, murder, strife, deceit, etc. That is the depth of sin. But how do people reach that depth of sin? Where do they start? Which is the first step downwards? That you see in verse 21. Even though they knew God, they did not honor him as God or give thanks. They did not glorify him as God. They did not give God first place in their life. Do you know that all sin begins here? We don't give God the place he deserves in our life, and we don't give thanks to him for all that he does for us. We are ungrateful and self-centered. All sin begins, as described in verse 21. We don't honor God as God, and we don't give him thanks. We're self-centered, that even when God blesses us, we think we deserve it. And, you know, a lot of Christians are like that. They don't give God first place in their life. They do give God some place. I mean, they go for meetings and say a few things to God, nice things in prayer, but it's maybe their business or their home or their job or their wife or somebody who's more important in their life, not God. God doesn't have first place. And when God doesn't have first place in your life, you can say that you're a backslider already. You may not be doing evil things on the outside, but God doesn't have first place in your life. A true disciple of Christ is one who has given first place to God. God's absolutely number one. And one mark of God being number one is what it says here about giving thanks. How do you know whether God's number one in your life? You're deeply thankful to God for everything he does for you. You don't take anything for granted. You don't think, well, I deserve that. You don't deserve anything. You and I don't deserve anything, my dear friends. We deserve nothing. Everything is God's free gift of grace and mercy. So, if we recognize that, we can be saved from a lot of sins. If you want to be saved from sin, start here. Don't do what is described here. Do the opposite. Give God first place in your life, in every area. Examine your life and see whether you're giving God first place. And see whether you're grateful to God for everything He's given you. To begin with, physical health. Are you thankful to God for physical health? For your home, for your parents, for your family, for the fact you have a job, for the fact you have many, many, many blessings God's given you. Don't compare yourself with somebody who has more than you and keep wishing that you had more. That's the way the devil traps you into covetousness and jealousy and greed to make your life miserable. And then you find yourself murmuring and complaining instead of giving thanks. See, when people murmur and complain, you can be absolutely sure they haven't given God first place in their life. You can be absolutely sure they're backsliders. They have already started going down. Maybe they haven't reached the bottom yet of being slanderers and haters of God like it's described in the end of chapter 1, but they're on their way there. You know, when you see these slippery slides in the playgrounds, children's playgrounds, and you see a child has just started going down from the top, you know he's going to reach the bottom. It's just a matter of time. Just a couple of seconds and he's at the bottom. But right now he's at the top. He's only started coming down. And it could be like that in your life. When you don't give thanks, when you don't give God the first place, you're at the top of that slide. It's just a matter of time before your backsliding goes all the way down to the bottom and you won't be able to stop it. So please be careful in these areas if you're serious about experiencing the full gospel. Just learn from the failures of others. How did that fellow go into this sin? By not glorifying God as God, not giving Him the place He deserves as the creator of this universe. And secondly, not giving thanks. But they became futile in their speculations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing to be wise, they became fools. The world is full of people who imagine that they are very clever. There are people who even try to say there are a lot of mistakes in the Bible, and they imagine themselves to be so clever, so wise, so arrogant. But their foolish heart was darkened. You see, speculation mentioned in verse 21 is something to do with our mind. And in the world, people place emphasis on the body and the mind. The body must be fit and strong and muscular and healthy, and the mind must be sharp and clever and well instructed. But most human beings don't place any emphasis on the most important part of their being, which is their spirit. Even animals have a body and they take care of it. And you know that dogs have a mind. They can respond to what you say. They think. They have a sense. But they don't have a spirit. And when you think only of your body and your mind, you have descended to the level of an animal already. What is it that's going to lift you above the level of an animal? When you give importance to that most important part of you, which animals don't have, your spirit, which gives you a conscience, which tells you when you do something wrong, which makes you aware that there's a God in heaven to whom you're answerable. So here it speaks about people who are futile in their speculation. They use their mind, and they don't understand that a mind cannot reveal all the factors involved in a particular situation when it comes to spiritual things. The mind is very good when it comes to science or earthly matters, but when it comes to spiritual things, the mind cannot factor in everything. A lot of factors that the mind cannot figure out. And their heart is darkened. Here the emphasis, the contrast is between the mind and the heart. Their heart becomes foolish and it is darkened. So if you want light, you need to get it in your heart first, in your spirit, where God shines the light of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We don't understand it primarily. We receive it in our heart and then we understand it. The heart comes first and then the mind. Give importance to your heart.